By 9:15 a.m., Karen had successfully delayed the pool repair by exactly 97 minutes and counting. She stood guard at the pool gate like a khaki-clad Cerberus, armed with an ever-growing stack of violation notices and a thermos of coffee that was keeping her running at maximum efficiency. Joe Martinez sat in his truck, cell phone pressed to his ear, explaining to his dispatcher why the simple pool repair was turning into an episode of bureaucratic theater. His crew lounged in whatever shade they could find, playing cards and checking their phones, while the clock ticked toward their next scheduled appointment. "This is ridiculous," muttered Tommy, Joe's youngest crew member. "We could have had the new pump installed by now." "Easy, kid," Joe replied, but his jaw was tight. "Every neighborhood has one. Usually they calm down once the work starts." They clearly hadn't met Karen Whitmore before. Karen, meanwhile, was on her own phone, pacing the pool deck with the intensity of a caged tiger. "Patricia, I don't care if you approved it verbally. Written authorization is required for all major renovations, and pool equipment replacement definitely qualifies as major renovation under Section 15 of our charter." Patricia Chen, the beleaguered property manager who'd been dealing with Karen for 3 years, could be heard sighing from space. "Karen, the board voted to approve this repair 2 weeks ago. You were there. You voted yes." "I voted to approve the expense," Karen corrected, "not the contractor parking arrangements. Those are 2 entirely different authorizations requiring separate documentation." "Really, Patricia, I'm surprised you don't know this." Meanwhile, residents were beginning to emerge from their units, drawn by the commotion like rubberneckers at a traffic accident. Mrs. Patterson from the corner unit appeared with her morning coffee, settling into a lawn chair with the clear intention of enjoying the show. The Hendersons from upstairs lingered on their balcony, whispering to each other and occasionally pointing. Karen noticed the audience and straightened her shoulders. If there was one thing she loved more than enforcing HOA regulations, it was enforcing HOA regulations in front of witnesses. "Now then," she announced, approaching Joe's truck with renewed purpose, "I've been reviewing the contractor insurance requirements, and I'm afraid there are some additional concerns." Joe rolled down his window. "Ma'am, we provided proof of insurance when we submitted our bid." "Yes, but that was general liability insurance. I need to see proof of specific pool equipment installation coverage, environmental impact insurance, and bonding documentation for chemical handling." "Chemical handling?" Joe's voice rose slightly. "We're replacing a pump, not running a meth lab." Karen gasped audibly. "Are you suggesting that pool chemicals aren't potentially hazardous materials? Because I happen to have the OSHA guidelines right here." "Karen." The voice cut through her lecture like a knife through butter. Everyone turned to see Bill Morrison, the HOA president, walking toward them with the measured gait of a man who'd been through this dance before. Bill was a retired school principal with infinite patience for children and absolutely zero tolerance for adult nonsense. "Bill." Karen's voice shifted to honey-sweet innocence. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to these gentlemen about our insurance requirements." "Karen, go home." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Karen blinked rapidly, clearly not having expected such a direct confrontation. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Go home. Let these people do their jobs." "I am doing my job," Karen protested, clutching her clipboard to her chest. "Someone has to ensure proper protocols are followed. The insurance liability alone." "The insurance is fine. The permits are fine. Everything is fine, except you standing here making problems where none exist." Bill's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "These people have been waiting 3 months to swim again." Karen looked around at the assembled crowd, searching for support and finding only irritated faces. Mrs. Patterson was openly shaking her head. The Hendersons had retreated inside and closed their blinds. Even Mr. Jacobson, who usually supported Karen's stickler approach to rules, was avoiding eye contact. But Karen Whitmore hadn't become the most feared HOA board member in Willowbrook Commons by backing down at the first sign of opposition. "Actually, Bill, I've been doing some research, and I think you'll find that as Secretary-Treasurer, I have the authority to halt any construction project that poses potential compliance issues." She pulled a thick binder from her oversized purse. According to the revised bylaws from 2019, specifically Amendment 7C, which you apparently forgot about. Karen. Bill's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I'm asking you nicely. One last time. Are you threatening me? The question hung between them like a lit fuse. Joe Martinez watched from his truck, recognizing the moment when a neighborhood dispute was about to become something much more serious. His crew had stopped their card game and were paying attention now, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Karen squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. Because if you are Bill Morrison, I should remind you that I have detailed documentation of every single meeting, every vote, and every decision this board has made for the past 3 years. And I'm quite certain the other homeowners would be very interested to learn about some of those decisions. Bill's face went very still. What are you implying? Karen smiled that shark smile again, but this time it had real teeth. Oh, I'm not implying anything. I'm simply stating facts. Facts that I'm sure everyone would love to hear about. Starting with the landscaping budget discrepancies from last spring. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen Whitmore's Honda Pilot screeched into the Willowbrook Commons parking lot at exactly 7:47 am, 17 minutes before the pool contractors were scheduled to begin work. She'd been watching them from her kitchen window since dawn, clipboard already in hand, wearing her unofficial uniform of khaki capras and a polo shirt emblazoned with AHOA board member in gold lettering she'd had custom made at the mall kiosk. The pool had been broken for 3 months. 3 months. The filtration system had failed spectacularly during the 4th of July barbecue, turning the water a nauseating shade of green that made children cry and adults gag. The repair estimates had been astronomical, the board meetings contentious, and the homeowners increasingly hostile. But finally, they'd secured funding and hired Martinez Pool Services, the best in the county, according to Yelp reviews Karen had meticulously analyzed. She marched toward the pool area, her wedge sandals clicking against the concrete with military precision. The contractors were already unloading equipment from their truck, a sight that should have filled her with relief. Instead, it filled her with dread, because Karen had just spotted something that made her blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. Excuse me, she bellowed, her voice carrying across the entire complex. Excuse me. The lead contractor, a weathered man in his 50s with calloused hands and kind eyes, looked up from the massive pump he was wrestling out of the truck bed. Morning, ma'am. You must be with the HOA. I am Karen Whitmore, Secretary Treasurer and Compliance Officer of the Willowbrook Commons Homeowners Association. She thrust her clipboard forward like a shield. And we need to talk. Right now. The man wiped his hands on his coveralls and extended one toward her. Joe Martinez. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. That truck, Karen interrupted, pointing an accusatory finger at the Martinez Pool Services vehicle, is parked in the fire lane. Section 4.2 of our community guidelines specifically prohibits any vehicle from parking within 15 feet of the hydrant. That's a $200 fine. Joe glanced back at his truck, then at the fire hydrant that was clearly more than 15 feet away. His crew had stopped working and were now watching the exchange with poorly concealed amusement. Ma'am, I measured it myself. We're at 18 feet. Karen pulled a retractable measuring tape from her pocket with a flourish that would have impressed a Vegas magician. We'll just see about that, won't we? As she marched toward the truck, unspooling the measuring tape with dramatic flair, Mrs. Chen, from Unit 47, poked her head out of her sliding door. Oh no, she muttered to her husband. Karen's got the measuring tape out again. Remember what happened with the mailbox incident? The measuring tape confirmed what Joe already knew, 18 feet, 6 inches. But Karen wasn't deterred. She studied her clipboard with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. The truck may be legally positioned, she announced, but I don't see any permits posted on the windshield. Section 12.7 requires all contractor vehicles to display valid parking permits, obtainable through the HOA office for a modest $25 processing fee. Joe's patience, legendary among his crew for surviving decades of difficult customers, began to show hairline cracks. Ma'am, Your property manager approved this job 2 weeks ago. We have all the paperwork. Patricia Chen is not authorized to issue parking permits, Karen declared with the authority of someone who had memorized every subsection of their bylaws. Only board-certified HOA officials can approve such permits. And as luck would have it, I happen to be the only board-certified official present. The irony wasn't lost on Joe's crew. They'd worked hundreds of HOA communities, dealt with every type of bureaucratic nightmare imaginable. But this was something special. This was Karen operating at peak efficiency, wielding her clipboard like Excalibur and her measuring tape like a magic lasso of justice. So what do you need from us? Joe asked, his tone carefully neutral. Karen smiled. Not a warm, welcoming smile, but the predatory grin of a shark who'd just spotted a wounded seal. First, you'll need to move your truck to the visitor parking area, which is a quarter-mile walk from here. Then, you'll need to fill out Form 27B for contractor vehicle registration, Form 15C for equipment storage permits, and Form 8A for noise variance requests, since your equipment will presumably make noise. How long does that take? Well, Karen consulted her watch with theatrical precision. The forms need to be submitted in triplicate, reviewed by the Architectural Committee, and approved by a majority vote of available board members. I'd estimate 3 to 5 business days. The pool, meanwhile, continued to look like a science experiment gone wrong. Bill Morrison's face had gone from red to white to an alarming shade of purple in the span of 30 seconds. Karen watched with satisfaction as her carefully aimed barb hit its target. She'd been saving this ammunition for months, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it. The landscaping budget, she continued sweetly, that somehow went from $12,000 to $18,000 without a board vote. And coincidentally, Morrison Landscaping, your nephew's company, if I'm not mistaken, received the contract. The assembled crowd of residents had grown larger, drawn by the scent of genuine HOA drama. This was better than reality television, and it was happening right in their own backyard. Mrs. Patterson had actually pulled out her phone and was recording. Joe Martinez made a command decision. All right, boys, pack it up. We'll come back when this gets sorted out. No. The word exploded from Karen with surprising force. You will not pack up. You will complete the work you were contracted to do, in accordance with proper procedures, which means following all HOA guidelines without exception. And you will not tell contractors what they can and cannot do. Bill shot back, his composure finally cracking. You're not the HOA board, Karen. You're one member of the board, and you're out of line. Karen laughed, a sharp sound that made several residents wince. Out of line? I'm the only one doing my job. While you've been rubber-stamping approvals for your friends and family, I've been protecting the interests of the actual homeowners. That's enough, Bill growled. Oh, is it? Because I have documentation going back 18 months. The holiday light installation that went to your brother-in-law's electrical company. The playground equipment from your golf buddy supply business. Should I continue? The crowd was riveted. This was the kind of small-scale corruption that made local politics simultaneously boring and fascinating. Everyone knew Bill Morrison was probably a decent guy who'd maybe cut a few corners, but Karen was painting a picture of systematic nepotism that was hard to ignore. Patricia Chen chose that moment to arrive, parking her Honda Civic behind Joe's truck and climbing out with the weary expression of someone who dealt with this exact scenario too many times. What's the situation? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. The situation, Karen announced triumphantly, is that our esteemed president has been running the HOA like his personal employment agency, and I'm the only one with the backbone to call him on it. The situation, Bill countered, is that Karen has lost her damn mind and is sabotaging a pool repair that everyone wants and needs. Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, probably counting to 10 in multiple languages. Karen, do you have actual proof of financial impropriety? Karen's triumphant expression flickered slightly. I have documentation of irregularities that warrant investigation. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Karen had documentation, certainly. She documented everything with religious fervor, but actual proof of wrongdoing. That was a different matter entirely. The landscaping budget exceeded authorization by $6,000, Karen said finally. Because of the storm damage in March, Patricia replied patiently. Emergency repairs that were approved retroactively at the April meeting. You were there, Karen. You abstained from the vote. I abstained because proper procedures weren't followed. You abstained because you were mad that we didn't use your contractor, Bill interrupted. Your husband's landscaping company. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Karen's face went through several color changes of its own, settling on a mottled red that clashed badly with her polo shirt. How dare you, she whispered. How dare I what? Tell the truth. Your husband submitted a bid that was 30% higher than everyone else, and when he didn't get the job, you started finding problems with everything the board did. The crowd was eating this up. Mrs. Patterson had actually moved her lawn chair closer to get a better view. The Hendersons were back on their balcony with what appeared to be popcorn. Karen looked around at the assembled faces and saw something that shook her more than Bill's accusations. She saw people who were tired of her. Not afraid, not respectful, just exhausted by her constant need to control everything. But Karen Whitmore hadn't survived 3 years of HOA politics by backing down when things got uncomfortable. Fine, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You want to play hardball, Bill? Let's play hardball. I resign from the board, effective immediately. The silence was deafening. But, she continued, pulling her phone from her purse, I'm calling an emergency homeowner meeting for tonight. Let's see what everyone thinks about your leadership when they hear about the missing reserve fund money. Bill went very still. What missing money? Karen's smile was pure venom. The $23,000 that was supposed to go into the reserve fund last year, but somehow got redirected to general maintenance. Maintenance that included a lot of work by companies owned by your friends and relatives. She turned to address the crowd directly. How many of you knew that our reserve fund, the money set aside for major repairs like this pool, is sitting at less than half of what it should be? How many of you knew that when the pool broke, we had to take out a loan because the money that should have been there was spent on other things? The murmur that ran through the crowd was ugly. These were people who paid HOA dues religiously, who trusted that their money was being managed responsibly. The idea that their reserve fund had been raided was the kind of thing that could turn a neighborhood dispute into a genuine revolt. That's not. Bill started, then stopped. Because Karen was right about the numbers, even if she was wrong about the reasons. Emergency homeowner meeting. Karen repeated, louder now. Tonight, 7 p.m. in the community center. We're going to vote on new leadership, and we're going to audit every financial transaction from the past 2 years. She looked directly at Joe Martinez, who had been watching this suburban drama unfold with the fascination of an anthropologist studying a particularly toxic tribe. And Mr. Martinez, you'll be paid for your time today, don't worry. Once we sort out this mess, the pool will get fixed properly, with full transparency about where every dollar goes. With that, she turned on her heel and marched toward her Honda Pilot, leaving behind a crowd of stunned residents, a furious AO president, and one very confused pool contractor. But as she reached her car, Karen paused, because she'd just burned every bridge in Willowbrook Commons, and she was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she'd gone too far this time. The pool water continued to look like something from a science experiment, and now there was no telling when it would get fixed. By 6:45 p.m., the Willowbrook Commons Community Center was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car. Karen had expected a good turnout. Controversy always drew a crowd, but this was standing room only, with residents spilling out into the hallway and several people participating via video call on phones held up by neighbors. Karen sat at the front table, her documentation spread before her like a legal brief, trying to ignore the fact that her hands hadn't stopped shaking since lunch. She'd spent the afternoon preparing her presentation, cross-referencing financial records, and wondering if she'd just destroyed the community she'd worked so hard to protect. Bill Morrison sat at the opposite end of the table, flanked by the other 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Patricia Chen sat between them with her laptop open, looking resigned to a very long evening. "Before we begin," Bill said, standing to address the crowd, "I want to apologize to everyone for this morning's disagreement, and I want to thank Joe Martinez for his patience." "Joe, are you planning to come back tomorrow?" Joe, who was sitting in the back row like he was attending his own funeral, nodded slowly. "Assuming you all can work this out, yeah. Pool's not gonna fix itself." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd. "Now then," Bill continued, "Karen has called this meeting to discuss some concerns about the board's financial management. Karen, the floor is yours." Karen stood, and for a moment, looking out at all those faces, some curious, some hostile, some just tired, she felt the weight of what she was about to do. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were her neighbors, people who trusted the board to manage their money responsibly. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I know this is unusual, but I believe you have the right to know how your HOA dues are being spent." She clicked her remote, and the first slide of her presentation appeared on the wall. It was a simple bar chart showing the reserve fund balance over the past 3 years. "As you can see, our reserve fund has decreased by 35% since Bill took over as president. This fund is supposed to be our safety net for major repairs and emergencies." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. "Karen, what should that number be?" "According to industry standards, we should have 6 months of operating expenses in reserve. That would be approximately $180,000. We currently have $78,000. The murmur turned into actual conversation. People were turning to their neighbors, asking questions, looking concerned. "Now I want to be clear," Karen continued, and something in her tone made the room go quiet. "I don't believe Bill deliberately misappropriated funds, but I do believe there's been a pattern of financial decisions that have put our community at risk." She clicked to the next slide, showing a breakdown of maintenance expenses. "Over the past 2 years, 73% of our maintenance contracts have gone to companies owned by board members' relatives or friends. This isn't necessarily illegal, but it raises questions about whether we're getting the best value for our money." Bill stood up. "Karen, you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Karen's voice cut through his objection. Morrison Landscaping received $31,000 in contracts, despite submitting bids that were, on average, 22% higher than competitors. Chen Electrical got the holiday lighting contract without a formal bidding process. And Patterson Plumbing has been our emergency plumber 6 times this year, despite being located 45 minutes away. The room was dead silent now. These weren't abstract financial irregularities. These were their neighbors potentially gaming the system. Patricia Chen cleared her throat. "For the record, Chen Electrical is my ex-husband's company. I recuse myself from any votes involving them." "But you don't recuse yourself from recommending them," Karen pointed out. "And recommendations from the property manager carry significant weight with the board." This was the moment Karen had been building toward, the culmination of months of investigation and preparation. But looking out at the sea of faces, she felt something she hadn't expected: doubt. Because yes, the numbers looked bad. Yes, there had been irregularities. But these were also people she'd worked with for 3 years, people who'd volunteered their time to keep the community running. Bill Morrison might have bent some rules, but he'd also organized the annual block party, mediated neighbor disputes, and spent countless hours dealing with contractor headaches. However, Karen continued, surprising herself. "I want to acknowledge something else. Running an HOA is a thankless job. Bill and the board have donated hundreds of hours of their time, often dealing with difficult situations and impossible demands." She looked directly at Bill, "including demands from me." The admission hung in the air. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I've spent 3 years finding fault with everything this board has done. I've questioned every decision, demanded documentation for every expenditure, and generally made everyone's life more difficult in the name of transparency and accountability." Karen paused, gathering her courage for what came next. "And I was right to do so, up to a point, but I was also wrong about something important. I was so focused on preventing any possibility of impropriety that I lost sight of what actually matters: keeping our community functioning. She clicked to her final slide, which showed photos of community events over the past 3 years. The holiday party, the summer barbecue, the playground installation, the book club meetings in the community center. This is what actually matters. Not perfect adherence to procurement procedures, not having 6 months of reserves, not following every regulation to the letter. What matters is having a place where people want to live, where children can play, where neighbors know each other. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning cycling on. "So here's my proposal," Karen said, looking around the room. "We establish a finance committee with rotating membership to provide oversight of major expenditures. We implement a formal bidding process for contracts over $5,000. And we commit to rebuilding our reserve fund over the next 2 years." She took a deep breath. "But we also commit to remembering that perfect is the enemy of good. Sometimes the best contractor isn't the cheapest one. Sometimes emergency repairs can't wait for a formal board vote. And sometimes it's okay to trust our neighbors to do the right thing." Karen sat down, her heart pounding. She'd just spent 20 minutes systematically dismantling Bill's leadership, then advocating for a middle ground that would preserve most of his authority. It was possibly the most contradictory presentation in HOA history. Bill Morrison stood slowly, looking older than he had that morning. "Karen, thank you. You're right about the financial oversight. We can do better." He looked out at the crowd. "I'll support Karen's proposals. And I think we should add one more thing: term limits for board positions. Nobody should have this much power over their neighbors for too long." The vote was unanimous. As people filed out of the community center, many stopped to shake Karen's hand or offer words of support. Even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been feuding with Karen over fence heights for 2 years, gave her a grudging nod of respect. But the person Karen was most interested in talking to was Joe Martinez, who was packing up his notebook and preparing to leave. "Mr. Martinez," she called out, "about tomorrow." Joe turned, and to Karen's surprise, he was smiling. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what happened here tonight. Most places, a fight like this would end with lawyers and restraining orders. So you'll be back?" "Oh, I'll be back. Wouldn't miss it. That pool's been broken long enough." As Karen walked to her car, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: cautious optimism. The pool would get fixed. The finances would get straightened out. And maybe, just maybe, Willowbrook Commons could become the kind of community where people actually wanted to live. But as she reached her Honda Pilot, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw the news about your HOA meeting. Very interesting. We should talk. Brookhaven Estates Board." Karen stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across her face. Apparently, word of tonight's meeting was already spreading to other communities. Other communities with their own problems, their own Karens, their own bills. She typed back, "Happy to consult. My rates are very reasonable." After all, somebody had to keep the HOA boards honest, and Karen Whitmore was very, very good at her job. The pool was finally going to get fixed, but Karen's work was just beginning.